Welcome to a very special live edition of Buckeyes Tomorrow Morning for Wednesday, September 6th. I'm your host, Tom Orr. The Youngstown State game is in 3 days, no matter what Tony Gerdeman just tried to talk me into. The game against Michigan in 80 days. Tony and I live inside the Woody Hayes Athletic Center. Tony, we just talked to Ryan Day. We talked to Jim Knowles. I have maybe more notes than I've ever had from a two-coach press conference. So we might go until it is literally tomorrow morning. Right now, Kevin is freaking out behind the camera. I can see him having a little bit of a breakdown. It's fine. It's fine. Let's start with the quarterbacks. Tony, what's going on with the quarterbacks?
Oh, well, Kyle McCord is still your starter, and Ryan Day wants to play Devin Brown some more. Interestingly, he would also like to play Kyle McCord more. He would like to get all of them some more snaps, and that's kind of an issue at this moment, just finding snaps for everybody. But no changes other than you want to get Devin Brown back out there, Kyle McCord, some good, some bad, some stuff that everybody wants to have back. Just as Ryan Day said after the game, and didn't really change his mind after watching film, but nothing, like the horror.
Yeah, I think you go back and listen to our post-game show, and you go back and listen to the Buckeye Weekly that we dropped this morning, and it's kind of, it is what a first game looks like. Ryan Day shared with us the axiom that we shared after the game. You get more, your biggest improvements between game one and game two, because he talked about the fact that you come into the season with a bunch of assumptions. You think, based on what you've seen in practice, I think this will work. I assume this will work. I assume this type of, this personnel grouping is the best, or this type of play will work well with this personnel grouping, or whatever it is. And then he said, you get into game one and you find out which of your assumptions are wrong, and then you have to adjust to that, which is interesting. I've never heard the game one to game two thing explained in quite that way, but he said it, and it was kind of like, that makes sense.
Yeah, now he didn't want to go into detail on what those assumptions were, which is no surprise. But yeah, I think we all do. You always go in thinking and expecting some things to happen, but then you also have to expect the unexpected, which throws everything out the window, and we'll get into that later. But yeah, you go in and you've seen everything you've seen in practice. You expect things to go one way. You have, I don't know if it's is it expectations, is it hope, is it assumption? I think it's all of those things. And then the next week is fixing what didn't go right and making the assumptions become eventualities, I guess.
Well, you're working with a bigger data set at that point. And the data set for Kyle McCord was a bunch of times last year where he came in and handed the ball off in games that were 52 trillion to 3. And that's not particularly useful data. Now you have some useful data against what is, people can't wait to tell you how terrible Indiana is. But the Indiana defense is not bad. That is a team that's defense has some talent on defense, is a pretty well coached team on defense. That's Tom Allen's side of the ball. So generally your head coach, that side of the ball is going to be decent. So now you have some more useful data. And they did not get as many snaps for Devin Brown as they wanted to, but Ryan Day talked about the fact that he wanted to get Kyle McCord into rhythm. You want to see what Kyle McCord looks like when he is kind of the guy. And he pulled him for one drive in the first half and then one at the very end of the game. But you kind of have to, because if you're going to be the quarterback who is going to be the guy during the course of the season, potentially, you got to see. You don't want to have am I wrong about this because I didn't pull this guy? I pulled this guy off the field and we're rotating drives or whatever it is.
The reason coaches hate having to do this, to deal with two quarterbacks, and why they want one guy to step up, is because there is no right way to do this. There are only wrong ways to try to find snaps for guys. And he said they set out to have Devin Brown come out on the third drive, and you hope the situation allows for that. And then they wanted him to come out on the fifth drive, and you hope the situation allows for that. But this is a living, breathing thing each game. And so you can only do so much with your hopes and assumptions.
And, there was a lot of we have a super chat. Let's get a super chat.
Super chat, Jordan Kampler. It's now a bad time to ask Clemson their thoughts on facing a conference road team week one.
Jordan Kampler wants to know if this is a bad time to ask Clemson about facing a conference road team in week one. And I tweeted something along those lines last night, and had a bunch of people who couldn't wait to tell me, well, Duke is way better than Indiana, so that's a terrible comparison. It's like, okay, Indiana is, well, I mean, one of them said, well, Duke's like 14 points better than Indiana. Well, Ohio State won by 20 and Clemson lost by 21, and Tony, 41, I think, is more than 14. So, you know, it feels like there's probably an underlying point to all of this.
The point is, any win on the road, conference play or elsewise, is a good win. Mm-hmm. And you don't ever have to apologize for a win on the road in the conference, and coaches will take them and run all day long. Urban Meyer did it. Jim Tressel did it. You get the win and you get out of Dodge. Like, that's the whole thing. That's the whole saying about getting out of Dodge. Like, it came from football coaches.
Yes, football in the 1860s.
Rutgers.
In Rutgers. Yes, that is Dodge City, famously right down the train tracks from Piscataway. Yes, I think part of this whole thing, I think there's several reasons for this disconnect. The one that I'm going to talk about right now is the fact that I think one group of people, and I think I'm including us in that group, is saying anytime you get a win on the road in conference, that's good. That is a positive thing. I think other people are hearing that and saying, look at these morons. They're saying this outcome is good enough for Ohio State to reach what their ultimate goals are. And that's not at all what we're saying.
So you're saying no.
That's not at all what we're saying. Ryan Day, in fact, said exactly the opposite during the interview today, too. I mean, you go on the road, you get your win, you have a bunch of stuff to work from. There was good stuff to look at. There was bad stuff that they have to improve on. That's what week one is. And I think that, you know, there's people are sort of talking past each other right now where, you know, this is, that was a win. It was a 20-point win on the road against a team that has a pulse. That this was not Northwestern. This was not Youngstown State. This was a team that's going to win multiple games this year, whether that's 3 or 5 or whatever, we'll see. But it's week one. There's 1,000 things that can go wrong week one, especially when you're on the road, especially when you're playing a new quarterback. That's what happened to Clemson. Was look at all the dumb crap that went wrong for Clemson in that game on Monday night. Stuff didn't go perfectly for Ohio State, but they didn't do that.
Yeah, and that's why, So you're saying that this will get it done every week? Nobody is saying that. Like, playing the way they played in week one will not work out in week 12 and game 12. And that's just a dishonest argument, basically. And we're saying a win is better than a loss every single time. I don't care if it's the prettiest loss. It's still in the wrong column. And go back to Urban Meyer. What's the best thing about being 1-0? Like, what's the best thing about being 6-0? It was always, you know, any win was better than any loss. And if that's what people are trying to argue with us about, I feel pretty good about my argument.
Well, Ohio State is one of those programs where there are no moral victories. And the same people who are telling you right now that week one was grossly unacceptable and there are standards, if you ask them about moral victories, will tell you there are no moral victories at Ohio State. So this is the only, this is the kind of victory you get. It's literally a victory. So
there are moral losses, though, and they come from close victories.
Anything you can do to be miserable. I mean, that's I think my big takeaway. I thought one of the things that was interesting was Day was asked about, why were there not more shots downfield? You kind of logged where, air yards is something we talk about a lot with J.J. McCarthy and Michigan's offense. You logged that with Kyle McCord. What did you kind of find in terms of how far they were throwing downfield? I'm not expecting exact numbers, but and then sort of the why that Ryan Day led out behind that.
I think really there were only maybe 2 legitimately down 20 yards downfield, 2 or 3. One of them didn't count because it was to Marvin Harrison. He had stepped out, so that didn't count. So maybe 3. But he said, they dialed some stuff up, but a lot of it just comes down to the confidence in the offensive line, the confidence in the quarterback. These things need to marry and mesh. And so when that happens, they will call more, but this is also about a situation of just trying to control the controllables and keeping things going, staying ahead of schedule, because they're having some issues getting some the running game going, so you didn't want to start out in 2nd and 10. He said the more that the Buckeyes play, the more that the quarterbacks play, they'll be more comfortable dealing with a 2nd and 10 down the road than they necessarily are in the first game.
And when we talk about staying on schedule, you're talking about getting 4 yards on first down and then getting at least half of what you need on the later downs and then making it on 3rd and 4th. So, staying in 2nd and 6 and 3rd and 3 or shorter and, converting those 3rd downs. So when you do that, that's generally sort of where you generally perceive it to be. You can either run or pass here.
Yeah.
You will have times when you're running on 2nd and 18, but generally you're not going to pick the first down up by running on 2nd and 18. We have a super chat.
Super chat, Last Wing Butterfly. Our soon-to-be conference partner, Oregon, ran up the score on the lesser opponent to 81. Thoughts?
Oregon running up the score to 81 on a lesser opponent, which I think one thing that is in this question that she didn't mention is an in-state opponent.
Yeah.
Portland State. I generally don't expect, and I say this knowing that Ohio State hung 77 on Bowling Green a few years ago, but I generally think, if you're going to hang, a like eyebrow raising, like, oh, kind of score on someone, it's generally going to not be an in-state school because you've got you're building some ill will in-state. Like, you don't give a crap if you do that to just pick another school that had an unfortunate series of unfortunate events over the weekend. Arkansas State.
Yeah.
You'd be much more willing to do that if you're Ohio State, to do that to UC Davis or Arkansas State or Idaho rather than doing it to Youngstown State or Bowling Green or Miami.
Yeah. Doing it to a coaching staff that you'll be inviting to the coaches clinic next April. Like, that's, but here's your check. Take your 600,000 or whatever, because this is what we paid for.
600,000. What year are you talking about?
Well, I think Portland State may have gotten like 650. It's only like the 1.3 for like you bring in Buffalo to beat up on something like that, or UCLA. You pay them 1.5 to not have to play them, like Michigan.
And yet, who's coming back on Michigan's schedule now? Can't escape them.
Actually, Michigan has been able to escape teams that have been on their schedule before.
No, can't think of one example. Anyway, moving on. The offensive line, the quarterbacks are kind of the big story du jour or du week, whatever that is. But the offensive line, I think, at this point, after rewatching the game, I think the offensive line getting right and improving their play is, I think, the bigger concern. Can they improve it? Only one guy on the offensive line graded out as a champion. That was Josh Fryer. But Ryan Day also talked about the fact that the problems that they saw on film, and they saw problems on film, which is why only one guy graded out as a champion, the problems they saw on film were the fixable kind of problems.
Yeah.
It was not, this guy legitimately can't do it. It was, he was in the wrong place. He was looking at the wrong thing. He tried to block the wrong guy and someone else got, it sounds like it was more that kind of stuff, which is fixable, which, the offensive line, I don't think anyone walked away from week one feeling like, I feel great about the Ohio State offensive line, but it sounds like it's a little bit encouraging that may be solvable issues over the next week or two before you get to the Notre Dame game.
I think it's encouraging that Josh Fryer graded out a champion. It's not encouraging that Donovan Jackson or Matt Jones did not, but as Ryan Day said, these are all fixable problems. The part of the issue was, he said they were at 50%, the efficiency of 50% on 3rd and 4th and short. And that's going to be very difficult to overcome. And that's why they had to start throwing the ball on short yardage. And he said, we don't want to live like that. You have to be able to run the ball. As we've said many, many times, Justin Fry wanting to run the ball when everybody knows it's coming. They haven't been able to do that yet. And they were trying different ways to do that with 22 personnel, with 2 backs, 2 tight ends, with 3 tight ends. So they were trying some different things. And that will continue as they figure out exactly what they do and what they do best. But yeah, overall the offensive line will get better, but you would have been much happier to see your 2 veteran guards, your 2 potential all Big Ten guards grading out as champions.
And Josh Fryer is not a first-time starter, but this is a first-time, where he's entering the year as the starter. You get 3 guys who are in that boat, he and Josh Simmons and Carson Hinsman, and only Fryer, as you mentioned, graded out as a champion. But Hinsman graded out, the official quote was, quote, not bad, close quote. On Hinsman, Day said for the first road game at center, he thought he called a decent game, a few things that were a little funky, but now you can focus on, getting that stuff right. That's another one where, okay, I think the big picture focus right now needs to be on it's not there right now. No one should expect it to be there right now with a redshirt freshman, first-time starter, center. That's not – it needs to be there for – it needs to at least be better for Notre Dame, and it needs to be there when you're facing Penn State, when you're going up to Michigan. It's all is encouraging the right word? Is it, it feels like it's sort of on track to be solid by the time, not spectacular, but solid by the time that it really needs to be.
Well, I think for it to be encouraging, like we've seen the baseline now. Mm-hmm. So now you can, if it's not going up, then there's no encouraging aspect to it, I would say. But you would, if it doesn't go up this week, then you've got some issues. And so I fully expect it to come up this week. And then, but what does that mean?
Yeah, this is one of those weeks where I don't think you're going to see anything proven to be fixed. You could see proven to not be fixed and proven to be a concern where, okay, now it's a concern. I think you've got, this is a little bit like the first practice of the fall where, okay, we have our first data point and now you sort of see where the trajectory goes from there. You can't draw too many hard and fast conclusions from that first game, that first practice of the spring, that first practice of the fall. But now you kind of know where it is, and okay, now you'll see where it goes from there. One thing that was a really interesting data point from that first week was Chip Traynum, who, lining up not at the back of the I formation, so that makes him a fullback, except Ryan Day says he's not. He isn't a fullback. He's a big running back. There's a lot you can do with that, really creates stress on the defense. He's someone where it feels like, depending on how, this may be one of the assumptions that they were making with the team that didn't pan out the way they wanted to, where you have, if the line looks a certain way, then one type of running back versus another might be a better fit for that line.
Yeah, I think everybody was impressed by what they saw from him, and I started to think about here's a 30-year-old reference for you. Remember Raymont Harris played some fullback, played some running back at Ohio State, had a couple of nicknames. One was the Ultra Back, the other was the Quiet Storm. Chip Traynum played at Arizona State for a bit. So how about this? How about the Desert Storm?
I think they also used that sometime in the early 90s. That
right?
might be taken. Might be taken.
But as we said on one of the recent episodes, I think maybe the instant reaction, like you've got a budding fan favorite here with Chip Traynum because of the things that he can do, the things he's willing to do, and the different skill set that he has. And he's come a long way from being a kick returner that we were kind of excited to see that never really materialized. And then where would they have been without him last year at running back, and now finally kind of realizing this lifelong dream of being a Buckeye, and he's going to end up probably being pretty valuable.
Yeah, he does seem like he's gonna, the likelihood that he's playing a significant role on this team, however you want to measure that, snaps or carries or yards or whatever, feels like that's a number that had kind of trended up. I think the defense is maybe trending up a little bit at this point as well. We had sort of wondered, last week Jim Knowles had this kind of like throwaway line where he talked about, week one is like, oh boy, you have no idea what you're going to get. You could face the triple option. It was like, ha, ha, ha. And then they faced the triple option. And so it was like, did they know this was coming? And the answer was no. He was asked how many snaps did you play, practice against the triple option last week? And he's kind of laughed and said like 5. But then they dealt with it. And Indiana is not the most talented or explosive offense they're going to face this year. But if you're looking at the defense on the whole, getting thrown a complete curveball and just having to figure it out on the field, that was, when you look at that, boy, it was remarkable how well the defense played last week.
Yeah, and I completely forgot about that line he said last week about the triple option. So, but the thing that obviously we talked about it after the game, the fact that they were able to handle this, and we both expected that they hadn't done much of it. If obviously not knowing how much, you wouldn't expect to have to figure out how to do it a bunch against Indiana. Antoine Randall L is not walking through those doors, folks. But what Noel said is that he knows how to stop it from up in the box, or knows how to defend it, how to deal with it. But you have to be able to communicate that to the players, and then the players have to be able to actualize what you're telling them, and they did that, and they did it very, very well. And it's something that is an indicator that you will then be able to handle other forms of chaos, that he called it, like the unknown, because especially early in the season, you're always going to face stuff that you're not expecting, because this is the biggest game for everybody that you're facing, and so they're going to have to pull out all the stops, that sort of thing, and that'll continue on into the Big Ten as well, because they have to do something to contend with Ohio State. So this gives some evidence that they can handle different things. But as he also said, you still want to see how they do against like an actual drop back offense that is trying to do normal things, because that is still kind of the mystery, the pass rush, that sort of thing, because they wasn't much of a pass rush because there wasn't much of a passing game. So there are some things that you still have to see. Talking about Josh Proctor, how he's a downhill safety. Well, at some point you've got to be a downfield safety as well.
Well, both Ryan Day and Jim Knowles, when they were asked about Josh Proctor, talked about, the talent's been there. It's been the consistency. And Josh Proctor is, he's like an off-speed hitter. And lucky him, they weren't expecting Jamie Moyer to be late career Jamie Moyer to be the opposing team's starting pitcher, but there he was. And so, okay, well, now you're not going to be facing Jamie Moyer probably a whole lot the rest of the season. So can Josh Proctor hit the fastball? And can he be consistent when, yes, he's great going downhill against a run-first team. Can he do it when they're trying to throw the ball over his head? And the talent has always been there. Greg Schiano talked glowingly about Josh Proctor, and that's how long, how long ago was that? So that's sort of an open question. And then the safety rotation on the whole, because that was, I think, the biggest personnel was, Jahad Carter, Malik Hartford, Josh Proctor, those three guys. We talked about them all last week in the lead up to the game. I will raise my hand and say, when Josh Proctor tried it out there for the first play, I was like, really?
Yeah.
That was not what I was expecting. And then Jahad Carter, who they had been talking about as if he was maybe leading the thing through a bunch of the fall camp, didn't play a snap on defense. So the safety rotation is a little bit weird, and maybe Jahad Carter, slides in behind Lathan Ransom at the bandit spot on the boundary side. But, man, you wonder what that safety rotation is going to look like in a couple weeks, because what is Josh Proctor going to look like against a more traditional offense? How fast can Malik Hartford get up to speed? I mean, there's a lot to think about there.
Well, and Ryan Day was asked if Josh Proctor will continue to start, and he's like, yeah, I think so. And Jim Knowles said essentially the same thing, but it's a week-to-week thing. What was interesting to me is that they essentially went with Proctor over Malik Hartford because this was the first game, and Proctor obviously is much more experienced than Malik Hartford. So if the reasoning right now was because this was the first game, what's going to be, does this change in week 4 when it's Notre Dame? When is there enough experience on Malik Hartford's side to no longer have that be why he's not out here? Because if it's as close as they think, I'm seeing Proctor out there and hearing Day talk about it. You're thinking, well, maybe Hartford won't start at some point, but then listening to Knowles talk about it, it's like, well, I still think there's a pretty decent chance we see Hartford starting at some point this year.
Yeah, I think if you're a true freshman and you're going up against a guy in his 6th year, and it's close enough that it's a competition right now, the learning curve, you get to a 6 point in the 6th year where there's a little bit of a diminishing return as compared to the first year where that learning curve just about goes vertical for a while. Because how often, Tony, have we heard guys talk about the fact that, boy, this time the second year guys talk about, boy, this time last year, I had no idea what was going on. Well, you figure it out through the course of the season. Malik Hartford is already at the point where he's got enough figured out that they trust him to be out there when the game is not, this is not a 50-point lead. You trust him to be out there when it's, did he play in the first half? He might have played some.
I didn't really see him in the first half.
Yeah, but he was out there early, relatively early in the second half. So that to me is an indication that they are already kind of placing him somewhere near the circle of trust, and then you're that's only going to get more so as things go along.
And how much of the thinking is who will be the best option in December? And at this point, you've got to find out in September and October. That's so that that person can eventually be given the opportunity to take over and excel. And maybe I just said the same thing about the quarterbacks, but I think that one is much more settled. We don't need to revisit that, but I do think it's one of those things. Eventually, if he's even, he's leaving.
And the defensive line, I think there was a lot of, the defensive line didn't have very many sacks, and boy, so was it a bad day for the defensive line? Jim Knowles talked about the defensive line in terms of, they didn't have a lot of sacks, but man, they impacted the run game a lot. And how many 0 and 1 and 2 yard runs Indiana had? That's a defensive line staying home, shedding blocks, making plays, not just eating blocks, making plays.
Yeah, and that's what we talked the last time we talked to the defensive line. It was about playing as a unit, not worrying about who got the stats, not worrying about anything like that, just doing your job, staying in your lane, keeping contained, keeping control, and allowing that process to stop the ball. And it did it repeatedly. And Jim Knowles was asked, was there anything you were unhappy about? And he said basically the two things: gave up a first down on a third and long on a pass play, but also, another one was maybe a linebacker losing gap integrity because of the option that ended up going inside. And other than that, if you don't have any issues with the defensive line, the interior, talking about Mike Hall only getting 27 snaps, he's totally fine with it because of the beating that you're taking inside with the option game and the running game. So you're okay with that. Plus, Mike Hall, you want him to be able to rush the passer. That's what you can really get out of him. There's no passer to rush against Indiana, and you want to keep him fresh, obviously. So he's been pretty emphatic that he's okay with the rotation on the defensive line, talking about it earlier in camp, talking about it now. I wonder what happens in November when you need somebody to play 45, 50 snaps and they only play 30, if there'll be some going back and forth on the sideline between the defensive coordinator and the defensive line coach, or in a halftime or something like that, where it's let's get the 1A guys out there more and more.
Well, and having been on the field last weekend, I can tell you it was real warm. I think the broadcast said it was 110 degrees on the field or something like that. As a gentleman of larger carriage, I can tell you I would function better in the cold than in the heat. And I think as a larger gentleman, any interior defensive lineman, any offensive lineman is going to function better in the cold than in the heat. That's probably the last significant opponent, really, truly significant opponent you're going to play in that kind of heat. Because Notre Dame, you've got Western Kentucky in a couple weeks, and okay, it's a 4:00 game, and you never know what the weather's going to be in Columbus 2 weeks out. But you play Notre Dame at night, and then you're into October, and you're not going to have 110 degrees on the field in October. That's just so. You're also trying to keep them healthy. You're trying to keep the guys fresh. You're trying not to run guys in the ground. Because, boy, if you have, you're tired and you lose your technique a little bit and you get hurt, that's a big problem week one. And then do you think people would be talking about that a little bit?
Yeah.
I think a little bit. Just kind of running through other things real quick. I think they don't want to hold Davis and Igbinosun back because we talked about him on the Buckeye Weekly episode. He's so physical. You don't want to you got to play within the system. But how do you balance? You want him to be physical, but you don't want him to be too physical.
Yeah, it was interesting because the question was how do you coach that the physicality and the handsiness? What do you tell him about that? He's I don't tell him anything. Basically, you just let him do what he wants to do, but within the realm of technique and the rules. You can't do some certain things, but they're not going to try to dial down the physicality. They want that. They like that attitude. I think everybody, when you have that in the room, that kind of just it spreads to everybody else. And so you've got that. You've got the competition that he has brought to that room as well. We expected the corners to play well, and they did that. And Knowles seems pretty darn happy right now with them. And not that he can say he's happy. He said he has a cold heart, and he that sort of thing. Nothing can warm his heart. But he may have been lying.
Went from a defensive coordinator named Grinch to a defensive coordinator with the heart of the Grinch
There you
here at Ohio State. All right, let's go to Kevin real quick. He has we have some user question, listener, viewer, whatever, questions from the people.
Yes.
Yakov 22, overreaction or good take? Steve Day says Florida State will win the national championship.
Overreaction or good take? Florida State will win the national championship. I think Florida State. I mean, that was impressive.
Yeah, it was.
That was impressive. They're going to be in a position because boy howdy does the ACC look winnable all of a sudden. I think the question is going to be, do they have the depth?
Yeah.
Because you've got your top line talent. If Jordan Travis goes down, are you just done? Do they have the talent, the depth of talent to survive a couple injuries if they happen late in the season, and then you got to win a playoff game without a couple starters? That would be, I think, my biggest concern there, because that was impressive.
No, I loved everything I saw. Just imagine them with Travis Hunter, who was one time committed to them. That would have been impressive as well. But yeah, they were everything that people had been saying they were going to be, and maybe time to start believing a little bit in Florida State.
Yep.
Wingman Ted, are you at all concerned about our kick and punt coverages? It's one of my biggest concerns, considering that we have a special teams dedicated coach.
So concerns about the kick and punt coverages for Ohio State. How big of a concern is that for you?
Well, I mean, they didn't do a great job on Saturday for the most part. You let up some returns. There's a block in the back in there. As we said after the game, anytime a kicker and a punter are making a tackle in a game, that's not good. And so it's not a concern until it happens repeatedly, until it becomes a trend. At this point, you just you can chalk it up as an anomaly, but it's not an anomaly if it's the only game. So yeah, I think it's something to keep an eye on for sure.
If you gave Ryan Day a magic wand and said you can fix one problem on this team, I don't think that's the top of the list. I think the offensive line is probably the top of the list. Quarterback might be second, just to make everyone stop asking him about the quarterbacks. Maybe safety. I mean, I think there's a couple spots, because that's one of those things that it's not going to matter until it really matters. And that's just like one play a year. It's like, oh boy, that's it. Boy, it really mattered then.
And I think the decent punt return came on the side. Everybody was blasting punts that way.
Mm-hmm.
The Indiana punter was blasting punts. It was from right to left from the press box, and some out kicking of the coverage, I think, going on in there. And that's just something you address and you adjust.
Yakov 22. If offered the chance to fire the cannon and wear the Revolutionary War uniform,
yes,
yes.
Oh yeah, yes,
absolutely.
I mean, come on, yeah. Do I get to be the old guy with the plastic rim glasses?
I would just wait for the moment where, as people are walking by, like, who do I want to scare the crap out of, and then we can lure them in, and then you light the cannon. Now, I don't know how often they're going to get to do it this year.
How often do they ever get to do it?
Not very, but
they played Northwestern.
Yeah, and they played Northwestern and completely annihilated Northwestern, and they fire it off at the beginning of the game when they run out, after each score. I think after each touchdown and PAT, so that would have been 7, plus the one before the game, plus I think one at halftime, 8, and then end of the game 9. That might be a school record. The low-key best part of being those guys is getting to yell at people who walk in front of the cannon. They have like big tape things around it because they don't, it's not like they're shooting an actual cannonball out of there. That's not why the student section's empty. But the percussive force or concussive force, whatever it is, that comes out of there. They don't want you walking in front of it, even though, even if they're not obviously going to be shooting it off. But I have heard them yell at people with just a really condescending, it's a cannon. You don't want to walk in front of it. That I think would be the secret best part of being the cannon guy.
I don't understand the connection.
Well, a lot of the Revolutionary War stuff happened out in that area. And if you are from the East Coast, I can tell you that every town out there has a George Washington slept here kind of like, oh, here's the historic inn where George Washington slept one time, and how much of it is legitimate, I don't know, but there was a lot of Revolutionary War stuff happening. The Germans had the Hessians had a rather unpleasant Christmas, not far from Rutgers at one point. If you Remember your history.
Well, I mean, you can remember your present because there's not a lot of pleasant winters around there now either.
Jordan Kapler, who should Ohio State honor this year by lining single file and holding up that number?
Who should Ohio State honor by lining up single file and holding up that number? I mean, my mind immediately goes to Nikki Sualua, just because that's the
How do you hold up a 37?
Well, you need to work together. It's teamwork, Tony.
I mean, that is 10 digits, so I guess you can figure it out.
Yeah, I don't know, Tony. That seems like something that would be so ridiculous to do that I can't fathom anyone doing it. What about you?
What you would do instead of the train formation, you just do like the lowercase I formation, and do something like that. And then instead of like signaling a number, you would just have whoever doff a cap.
Oh, that's smart. Yeah.
But then they would have to leave the field for taking their helmet off.
Man, it was such a good plan right up until you brought that up. And then now it's like, oh, well, it turns out that won't work. All right. Well, I think we have hit the point where we're going to be asked to leave the building in just a little bit because someone else is going to be in here. I'm going to guess they'll have football practice in here a little bit, and some other sports practicing in here, and I'm sure a little bit later on today. So we're going to wrap it up right now. But thank you guys all for joining us live. If you are watching live, make sure you hit that thumbs up for us. That helps other folks find this show later. And if you were listening to this later on a podcast platform of choice, we would appreciate a 5-star rating and review on this and any other of the Buckeye Huddle shows that you enjoy. Tony and I just dropped a new episode of Buckeye Weekly on Tuesday, looking at the things that we learned rewatching the Ohio State-Indiana game, because you always miss stuff watching live, especially in person and not on TV. So you get a little bit of a different angle, a little bit of a different insight into things. So you'll hear Tony and I talking about a bunch of stuff. Some of it will probably make you mad. That's okay. Everyone seems to be the theme of the season, but that's okay. Season is young, and season is just getting started and getting to be more fun. Should be fun this weekend as well, with the Buckeyes hosting Youngstown State at noon at the Horseshoe. There is, real quickly, we should let people know about the traffic stuff. Cannon Drive is closed, same as last year. Make sure you download, if you're going to the game, make sure you save your tickets on your phone to your Apple Wallet app or whatever, because sometimes you'll have the issues coming into the stadium. So you save it in your Apple Wallet or whatever the Google equivalent is. I don't know.
Google Wallet.
Okay. Well, pretty derivative if you ask me, but that's okay. Save it to your Apple Wallet or Google Wallet or whatever wallet you.
BlackBerry wallet.
I don't think your regular wallet works, but whatever digital wallet you have, save your tickets there so you don't have issues coming into the stadium. But other than that, arrive early, enjoy Buckeye Huddle, and we'll talk to you guys tomorrow.